I'm Miri Soni from the Department of Sociology and Center for Research at St. Teresa's College, and I will be your host for this session. I'm indeed extremely delighted and find it my privilege to welcome each and everyone present here to another session of the Singularities International online conference on Love 2022, which is being organized jointly by the Kerala State Higher Education Council, the Department of Sociology and Center for Research, along with Teresian International of St. Teresa's College, Ernakulam. In the previous sessions, we had some fruitful discussions on the love of philosophy of love and how the absence of love is the root of social problems. Today, we have among us our esteemed resource person, Dr. Sin-Wang Chong, lecturer at Tesol School of Social Science, Education and Social Work, Queen's University, Belfast, Ireland, who will be speaking on the topic Self-Love to Mutual Love, Bridging Research Practice, Chasm in Language Education. A hearty welcome to you, sir. The famous American actress Lucille Ball once said, love yourself first and everything else falls into line. You really have to love yourself to get anything done in this world. I'm sure that today's discourse will help us put things in line as the actress believes and help us become the harbingers of changes that we wish to see. Today's plenary session will be chaired by Dr. Babu Rajan PP, Assistant Professor of English Literature at Sri Shankaracharya University of Sanskrit Kaladi. Welcome, sir. I invite our chair, Dr. Babu, to introduce his keynote speaker and formally welcome the gathering. So please.
Good afternoon, everyone, and good morning to perhaps Dr. Sin, because I think it might be around 9:30 at Belfast now. So you are right now at Belfast, Dr. Sin. Okay, good morning. So first of all, let the full seminar, international seminar on journal and Teresian International, which is a wing of St. Teresa's College, Ernakulam. So this afternoon, we have Dr. Sin-Wang Chong, and I welcome Dr. Sin-Wang Chong. And Dr. Sin is talking on the topic Self-Love to Mutual Love, Bridging Research Practice, chasm, that is gap in language education. So let me introduce Dr. Sin first. Dr. Sin-Wang Chong is a lecturer at Queen's University, Belfast, that is in Northern Ireland. Sin-Wang's main research interests include assessment feedback in higher education, education, language assessment, qualitative research synthesis. Sin-Wang is currently at Scotland, a research and the Research Institute for Learner Autonomy Education, Cantor University of International Studies, that's in Japan. So Sin-Wang is an associate editor of the journals, many journals, including Higher Education Research and Development, that's by Taylor and Francis. Then Innovation in Language Learning and Teaching, again by Taylor and Francis. And he's also the section editor of Education and Language in Elsevier's Encyclopedia of Language and Linguistics, 3rd edition. Together with Melbourne and Hamish Chalmers, Sin-Wang edits a special issue on evidence synthesis in language, learning and teaching to be published in Applied Linguistics Review. Sin-Wang is on the editorial review boards of a number of international refereed journals. He's a regular reviewer for leading journals in higher education and language education. Having served our regional educational research association's early career researchers network, Sin-Wang is appointed as convener of the network in July 2021. In September 2021, Sin-Wang is appointed as Executive Committee member of British Association of Applied Linguistics. Sin-Wang is a great assessor. Sin-Wang is a grant assessor of the Social Sciences and Humanities Research Council of Canada, and Sin-Wang is preparing a few books on language education in higher education, which is due to be published by Routledge, and a very important international publisher. So I think this is a very interesting topic, especially important for us Indians, as we are in a sense foreign language learners of English. So let me welcome Dr. Sin-Wang, Dr. Sin-Wang Chong. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the very detailed and well-researched introduction. Thank you so much. I'm very, very happy to be here, and thanks, Rena, for the invitation and for the arrangement and the accommodation because of time difference. I would try to share my screen first, and please tell me whether it works before I start. Just give me a second.
Yes, sir. Yeah, give us a second, sir. We will do it. Yes, sir. Your screen is working.
Can you see the slide in full screen?
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. Thank you. Okay. Thank you very much. As the host just introduced, the topic today is about research practice connection in language education, and I think it's a very, very appropriate topic for the theme of this transdisciplinary conference about love. And I start the topic of my talk as from self-love to mutual love. And my perspective on love relates to the professional and academic work that I do with a lot of language teachers, mostly English language teachers here in the UK and also elsewhere and internationally. You may have heard an introduction. I'm an assistant professor at Queen's University, Belfast, and I'm also an affiliated assistant professor at University of St Andrews. In both of my roles, I work with TESOL students, both in-surface and pre-surface English language teachers. So my perspective on love really relates to the professional practice. So let's see what I can contribute from a teacher-educator perspective in terms of love. And today I would like to start with a definition of love. And I think that's kind of warranted and expected in a conference with the theme of love. There are many different kinds of definitions of love in philosophy and literature and poetry. As a Christian myself, I found myself drawn to this definition, which is from the scripture in 1 Corinthians 13:4-5. It's a very, very nice and I think a rather comprehensive definition of what love really means. So I'm going to read this aloud so that we can kind of understand where my perspective comes from. So here it says, love is patient, love is kind, it does not envy, it does not boast, it is not proud, it does not dishonor others, it is not self-seeking, it is not easily angered, it keeps no record of wrongs, love does not delight in evil, but rejoices with the truth, it always protects, always trusts, always hopes, and always perseveres. And of course, there are a lot of characteristics of love, as you can see here. But today I would like to focus on two features or two characteristics of love mentioned in the Bible. And I have highlighted there, it's not about self-seeking, and love is also about trust. And when we think about self-seeking and trust and think about these two terms in the context of language education, about the relationship between teachers, frontline English teachers, for example, and educational researchers. There is not too much interaction between the two groups, and of course they both have their own discrete agenda, their own goals, and their own professional needs. There are seldom conversations between them, let alone trusts. So I would like to approach this topic about research practice connection from the perspective of self-seeking and trust. Now, when we think about the relationship between the two groups of stakeholders in language education, namely the researchers and the practitioners, the relationship, as I said, it's not very, very positive, and they seldom talk to each other. As you can see from this comic, that the practitioners are have this impression that the researchers are doing something all the same, and they're doing something they think it's very important, and they're writing papers, publishing, giving talks, presenting in conferences. So you can see that to them, researchers are quite the same to practitioners. They are doing things in their office. Maybe they are typing papers. They are doing research in front of the computer. Whereas for the practitioners, they will say, well, I work with students, I work with the real world every day, and it's about the impact of my work. So for researchers, you're just hiding in your office, and you may not fully understand what my needs are, and vice versa. So I think this is the current state of relationship between researchers and practitioners, not only in the field of education, but in other fields, I believe. So how do we address that? Because if we want educational research to have a real impact in real life, in practice, we need to involve practitioners. So for today's presentation, I would like to address precisely that. So I would like to start with an overview of researcher-practitioner relationship in language education, because that's my field and I cannot comment on other areas. And then I would like to introduce the notion of praxis, not practice, but praxis, as a frame to kind of understand the whole situation and to see whether there are ways for us to improve the situation. And I'm also going to propose the notion of open scholarship or open science, about how we can use open scholarship as a concept, as a frame of mind to involve practitioners in the research process. And I'm going to conclude my talk by proposing something called evidence ecosystem. So let's think about the relationship between researcher and practitioner relationship in language education. Well, just now I mentioned something quite general about them not talking to each other. In research, actually, in language education, it paints a rather bleak and gloomy picture. As you can see from this quote, that from some of the research participants, that the teachers think that the findings of academic research are bound to be less misleading, no less misleading and unreliable than teachers' experience and intuitions. So you see that kind of tension over here, is that when researchers kind of say, oh, teachers, you can't rely on your experience and intuitions only, you have to do something evidence-based on research or informed. But the teachers are thinking, oh, but your findings may not be applicable to my context. So you see that there is a kind of distrust between the two parties, between researchers and practitioners. And in other study, it was found that no language teachers, and it's a study based in Chile, based on a group of EFL teachers' responses, that no teachers in that particular study addressed specific empirical evidence to solve a classroom issue, and their awareness of journals was quite low. So the teachers, they are not able to apply the findings to their teaching in the classroom, and they don't really understand what journals are, what are the different journals in the field, which ones are good journals that I can trust, which ones are, something that I have to be careful of. So you can see that there is a lack of transfer between research and practice. But then, in fact, What do you think about the practitioner's attitude? Do you think the practitioners care about research? Just now from the two quotes, it seemed that the practitioners were quite hostile towards research and research findings. They questioned the applicability of research findings. But from the same study that I just discussed previously by Sato and Lowen in 2019, teachers actually care about research. And you can see that teachers think that research provides them with the emotional support. So maybe it's kind of like an affirmation. If they're doing something, they're experimenting with something in the classroom, and they see that in some publications, it's like a reassurance to them that they are doing something right or research informs. It provides emotional support. Additionally, the use of research also was encouraged by some external pressure. So it's something to do with the expectations of the schools, of the management, maybe from the government, that they would expect teachers to read about research to understand the state of the art of certain topics in their own profession. They may not be asked to produce research per se, but they are encouraged to read and consume and to try to apply research findings in the classrooms. But at the same time, despite their care and enthusiasm about research, teachers find it difficult to access research. I think you can understand that journal articles, especially published by those top journals in international academic publishers, they're hidden behind the paywall and you need to pay to get access to it. Not all journal articles are open access. So these teachers are often not affiliated with a university, and even they are affiliated with the university may not have the subscription of the journals. So they cannot access it. They may not have the time to read the journal articles. A typical journal articles in education is around 7,000 words to 10,000 words. So it's very long. And there is a lack of institutional support and very, very limited teacher-researcher interaction opportunities. So we can see from the practitioner's side that they actually care, but they face certain obstacles. Let's think about what the attitudes are in terms from the side of the researchers. What do researchers think about opening up a dialogue with frontline teachers? And from the side of the researchers, actually, I see some rosy pictures. For example, in this quote, the researchers actually say that it's better for us to open the door, to widen the door, and to increase the amount of dialogue with teachers rather than closing the door. So researchers in our field actually acknowledge the importance of engaging teachers with dialogues. But again, the more important question is, what should be the dialogue about? How should this dialogue be done? I think these are questions that I'm going to address in the later part of my talk. At the same time, in our field, talking about researchers' initiatives, there is a subfield in second language acquisition called Instructed Second Language Acquisition, ISLA, which specifically focuses on research on how a second language is learned or acquired in a classroom setting. So the findings of these studies are directly relatable to language teachers because they relate to language learning and acquisition that take place inside the classroom. And you can see a lot of publications, a lot of journals, a lot of books dedicated to instructed second language acquisition and also evidence-based teaching practices. For example, there is the journal Instructed Second Language Acquisition, and there's a recent book called Evidence-Based Second Language Pedagogy, written with the aim to promote research-informed pedagogy. And in our field, there are also some very, very good international journals focusing on practice in TESOL, in English language teaching. For example, TESOL Quarterly, and also you can see on the right-hand side, the journal that I added, Innovation in Language Learning and Teaching, which has a specific section called Innovative Practice, encouraging practitioners to report and to evaluate their own teaching practice. So it appears that from the side of the researchers, we have been doing a lot of publications, a lot of initiatives, a lot of invitations, so to speak, to practitioners to engage in such dialogue. But the question again remains, does the dialogue work for the practitioners? So that's my question, which I will address in the remainder of the talk. Now, before I answer those questions specifically, I would like to introduce the notion of praxis, which helps us think about the whole situation or phenomenon about researcher-practitioner conversation and interaction. And the notion of praxis actually stems from critical theory, and I'm sure you're familiar with critical theory, which talks about human beings as meaning-making agents. And human beings, of course, are defined not as a discrete and disembodied individuals, because human beings are influenced, shaped, and developed by their surroundings, their environment. So it's kind of like an ecological view towards what human beings are. But at the same time, very important to critical theory is that human beings are not just shaped by the environment where they are living in, but they also actively create and reshape those environments. Think about COVID. We are influenced by COVID in virtually every way possible. But at the same time, we also create new practices that we want to help improve the environment a little bit. Think about education. Shifting education online from face-to-face to online is an example of human beings not only being dominated by an environment, but trying to reshape the environment. So that's what critical theory is about. And one of the very key notions under critical theory is dialectical materialism. And I'm sure you know the word dialectic, it refers to conversations. So when we talk about phenomena, social phenomena, dialectic materialism perceives the phenomena as processes that are interlocked or interconnected with each other. One phenomenon influences the other. There is nothing called a single isolated phenomenon in the social world. So with these theoretical backgrounds, the notion of praxis, which is first adopted by Aristotle, is the Greek word, which means performing actions, or the process of doing things. So for praxis, it refers to not just practice, it's not just doing things, but doing things with an added dimension of reflexivity. So in other words, praxis is dialectical. It's not just about teachers using knowledge to inform the teaching practice. This is something that most people think about. It's teachers are consumers of knowledge, and knowledge is produced by researchers. So there is no connection between them. But what praxis is promoting, it's a conversation between the two. That knowledge, of course, would guide action in the first instance, right? But very importantly, knowledge is also being revised, extended, and enriched through action. So there is this reciprocal relationship between practice and knowledge. Essentially, what I'm saying is practice is a very useful lens to think about how we can unite theory or research and practice, wherein these inform one another and change together. They cannot be separated. It's not just about research. It's not just about my classroom practice. They are the same together, because think about it. The research produced by researchers are grounded in actual classroom practices, or they're based on responses from real life teachers and real life students. Whereas the practice in language classrooms are sometimes drawn from research produced by researchers. So what I'm saying is there is a need to see research and practice as a united entity, but not separated. So essentially, researchers need to partner. Now, I really want to emphasize the word partner. It's not researchers imposing or producing knowledge and asking teachers, hey, these are my findings. These are good stuff. Use them in your classroom. This is what people are doing currently. There is almost like a hierarchical view about researchers and practitioners. Researchers are always perceived as higher or nearer to the top of the hierarchy. But what I'm proposing is there is a need for partnership between researchers and practitioners in order to, of course, for researchers to offer their own theoretical and methodological expertise, but also to learn from teachers about what actually works in real life context in order for them to revise or to extend their knowledge. So after talking about the notion of practice and positioning my view about the relationship between researchers and practitioners in language education, I would like to move on to something more practical, because so far we've talked about ideas, right? How should we perceive the relationship between researchers and practitioners? But what actually have been done in our field in language education to facilitate that dialogue? And there is something called open scholarship, or some of the researchers will call it open science, that I would like to introduce, and I would like to share with you some initiatives, some examples in our field. Well, what is open science? Open science means opening up the scientific process. It involves different stages of the research process. For example, you can open up the methods. So, for example, you perform research openly. You can report research findings in a more accessible way, maybe not always a 7,000 word report, maybe something more concise, more teacher friendly. Reproducibility. That means research findings are able to be verified openly, for example, through replication studies. And also, of course, research can be evaluated openly by sharing the raw data, sharing your materials. And of course, there need to be incentives to reward open research. So this is what open science means, right? About opening up the whole research process. But I would prefer the term open scholarship more, because open scholarship is a more encompassing term to me than open science. Open science is mostly about, as I said, the scientific process. It's only about the researchers. It's only about the research community. But what I really want to promote here is open scholarship, which not only includes open access or open data, but it's also about opening up research resources to other stakeholders in education, specifically the teachers, right? So this is the term that I'll be using in the remainder of the talk. What are some initiatives in language education about open scholarship? There actually are a number of very exciting and very successful initiatives in our field. And one of the initiatives here is called Open Science Badges. And there are quite a number of journals in language education that already adopt these badges. So there are 3 badges. So journals can opt for the badges on open data and open materials. Open data refers to the data, the raw data being made available in addition to the research report itself to the public. Open materials refers to the availability of the research instruments. For example, you have a survey and you actually share that survey with the readers in addition to your report, or they can publish pre-registered reports. So these are some of the angles in which our field is going in terms of open scholarship. And the second initiative is called IRIS, and this is a very, very successful international initiative. IRIS refers to the digital repository of instruments and materials for research into second languages. So this is an online database where researchers are encouraged to submit and upload their research instruments, their research materials, their survey, their interview questions, or their lesson observation protocol, what have you, to IRIS, so that it becomes freely available to other people. If they are interested in conducting research in a similar topic, they may want to have a look at your instruments. They may revise the instruments, they may adapt the instruments. So this is IRIS. It's freely available to people around the world. Sorry. The next initiative has to do with the open science badges. So for example, registered report and replication. So registered report has to do with a publication, a piece of article which details your research plan. And then some journals will accept the registered report in principle, and then you conduct your research so that the methods of conducting the research can be viewed in detail by readers as well. So there are a number of journals in our field which publish register reports or replication studies. We talk about whether findings are replicable, and of course, sharing of research materials similar to IRIS. And then another very, very interesting initiative is called OASIS, which refers to the Open Accessible Summaries in Language Studies. The name speaks for itself. It basically is a one-page lay summary of publications in language education. So as I mentioned earlier, one of the constraints or hindrances of teachers when they want to read research is time and access. They don't have time to read 7,000 words. They don't have access to the original article. So what the website does here is asking authors to provide a one-page, non-technical summary of their own work. So I'm going to show you an example based on one of my recent publications on technology-mediated task-based language teaching. So this is what it looks like. It may be a little bit small, but I mean, this is one page talking about what this research is about, why it is important, and what did the researchers do, what did the researchers find, and some things to consider. So it's in bullet points, very short. You can finish reading in probably in 5 minutes. And if you're interested, you can click the link, which takes you to the article, which may or may not be open access, but at least teachers can have a sense of what the research is about. All right. So far, what I have done is to present to you a few initiatives on open scholarship. And they look like amazing initiatives. They are very successful. The responses from our research community are very, very positive. But again, my question is, what do these initiatives look like from a praxis perspective? And remember what we said earlier about praxis, it's the interaction, it's the dialogue, it's a two-way communication between researchers and practitioners. And if we look at the diagram on the right-hand side, you can see that so far the initiatives are mostly initiated by researchers, and they are providing resources, materials, or what have you, to practitioners, asking them, hey, these are made available. You can consider using them. It's a one-way communication. My question remains, what's the role of practitioners in open scholarship? Is there something that the practitioners can give in return to researchers? Is there anything researchers can learn from practitioners? So that's my question still. So for me, in order for dialogues to take place effectively between researchers and practitioners, there need to be a few conditions. And looking at this picture, definitely conversations may be quite difficult because they look like they're speaking in different languages. They may concern different things. So what are some conditions for effective dialogue, to take place? I believe, first of all, we have to reiterate that dialogue means a two-way communications. Right now, I'm giving a talk. This is not dialogue. It's a delivery of a speech. It's not dialogue. For dialogues to be effective, I think there are three essential conditions. The first condition has to do with the kind of lingua franca. I'm kind of borrowing the term, of course. It's the kind of common language that both teachers and researchers would understand. Sometimes I'm sure as researchers, we may tend to use terms or jargon that may not be very, very accessible to practitioners, right? So we have to establish a common language or a common way, a way of representation that could be understood and valued by both parties. And the second relates to the definition of love that I proposed or provided at the outset of the talk, which requires both parties to abandon the self-seeking mindset. Of course, we have things that we care and we think are important, and we can always say things that are important to us, right? But we also have to kind of think about what's important to the other party, what's important to the teachers, for example, in this instance, and develop trust with each other. And finally, I think there needs to be a common goal relevant to both parties on which actions are based, because currently two parties are doing different things. Researchers research, practitioners practice, they teach. They're doing different things, but we have to have a common goal to allow for goal-oriented actions. All right, so what I have done very recently is to start a new initiative called Tisographics. And I think this initiative, despite being very young and very new, has potential to address the things that I talked about so far, about the practices, perspective of open scholarship, about how it can involve teachers and practitioners in the dialogue. So Tisographics is a project that is funded by two universities, which I am affiliated with, Queen's University Belfast and University of St Andrews in the UK, and also the ESRC in the UK. So what we do is we provide and produce one-page infographic summaries. So instead of textual summaries, we provide infographic summaries to teachers on secondary research in TESOL. And TESOL refers to teaching English to speakers of other languages. Now, you may notice this is quite different from OASIS, something that we talked about before. We are working in partnership with OASIS, but we do something quite different. So OASIS provides textual summaries. What we do here is to provide infographic summaries with images, together with text, of course. OASIS focuses on all research published in language education journals. We only focus on secondary research. And I'm going to tell you what secondary research is, maybe you already know, and also why, more importantly, why we decide to focus on only secondary research. So just a little bit about secondary research. It is not the focus of this talk. Now, secondary research, maybe you have heard of another term, literature review. So you may have written a literature review before as part of your master's or your doctoral thesis, or literature review can be produced as a standalone piece. A lot of journals publish literature review. And as you all know, literature review synthesizes a body of literature on a selected topic. And there are two types of secondary research. I won't be calling it literature review. I'll be using the term secondary research. There is what we call traditional secondary research and systematic secondary research. So what's the difference? Traditional secondary research is something like a literature review that you may have done for your thesis, for your dissertation. It's done in a way that you tell a story, introduce different themes in a field. For example, I'm very interested in technology in language education, and I review literature in this topic, right? And then I critique the literature, what has been done what has not been done. So that's a traditional secondary research. We're quite familiar with that. But there is also systematic secondary research. And systematic secondary research is called systematic because the methods are systematic. So there is a formal set of methods that reviewers need to follow when they conduct systematic secondary research. For example, they have to have research questions. They have to specify what are the search terms, what keywords they use to search the literature, what's the time frame of the literature searched, and also what are the inclusion and exclusion criteria, meaning what are some of the standards that you apply to inform your decision of including the literature. And you may have heard of the terms meta-analysis or qualitative research synthesis, which refers to the synthesis of quantitative or qualitative data. So there are two types of secondary research, and I'm not going to go into detail because that's not the focus of my talk. Let's go back to the question I asked earlier. Why did we decide to focus on secondary research summaries instead of like all research or primary research? I'm going to skip this slide. Now, what are some of the advantages of reading secondary research for practitioners? If you remember what I said earlier about the constraints of practitioners, they do not have time, they do not have access, and they find it difficult to understand some of the jargon of research papers. If you can take a look at this very recent synthesis, this secondary research that I produced, just looking at the numbers in the abstract, I want to show you something. So you don't need to read the whole abstract, just a number in the middle part of it. So you see that the current study synthesizes qualitative findings from 16 technology-mediated TBLT studies, published between 2002 and 2017. So what do we have here? When we read one synthesis, one secondary research, one piece of secondary research, we get findings from 16, in this case, primary studies. So instead of reading 16 times 7,000 words, we're reading 7,000 words with 16 studies findings summarized for us, right? So that's why we decide to focus on secondary research, because it saves the time of the teachers. Okay. And in this case, this is a meta-analysis on second language anxiety and achievement. And you can see the number. Let's just look at the number. For this synthesis, it focuses on 97 reports with 105 independent samples. That means over almost 20,000 learners from 23 countries. So think about that. How much time do you need to spend if you want to read 97 reports? Yeah. And how much time do you need to spend to read one, which synthesizes 97 reports? So that's why I think secondary research has a lot of potential to inform the practice of teachers. Another advantage of secondary research, I think it's very suitable for practitioners. It's because it presents so much information in a single piece of work. Remember the numbers, 97, 16. The authors tend to use a lot of diagrams and images and tables to present a summary in a very, very reader-friendly way. For example, this one is another synthesis on Arabic as a heritage language, looking at different theoretical frameworks that inform heritage language studies. So you get an overview very easily. And if you're interested, I'm interested in the social aspect of these studies, I may go further and read those studies, but it's very, very easy to understand. This is another perfect example. This is a systematic review on digital game-based language learning language through playing games. And what the authors did here is to list, based on the pool of studies, of course, the different types of language games that are reported in the studies, for example, immersive games, tutorial games, and simulation games, and what have you, and the definitions of those games and those studies. So this is so suitable for teachers because teachers, instead of reading all the reviewed studies on the right-hand side, they can pick oh, I'm very interested in using, for example, music games to teach language, I may have to take a look at that particular study, or board games to teach language, I may want to take a look at that study. So it provides teachers with a choice and provides them with the autonomy to choose the topics that they want and only focus on that particular one, but without sacrificing the overview and the state of the art of the field. All right, so going back to the project, and so far I've just explained a little bit what secondary research is and why we would like to provide infographic summaries to teachers. And what we're aiming to do is, of course, to build up a database of resources for language teachers, for English teachers, so that they can use evidence synthesized in research to inform their practice. And we're just at a very, very preliminary stage of the project. So far, we have produced 46 infographics on, of course, on 46 pieces of secondary research. And you can see the distribution of the topics. We have virtually all topics in language education, assessment, grammar instruction, intercultural communication, language teacher education, reading instruction, vocabulary instruction, pronunciation instruction, and of course, technology. And it comes as no surprise that technology has the most secondary research because of COVID and because of the ever-changing nature of educational technology. So I'm going to show you what our infographic summaries look like. So here is an example, but I'm going to show you the website and I will share with you the link to the website. So you can download the infographic summaries. They are in PDF formats. They're free. You can download all of them and share with all your friends and colleagues. It doesn't matter. So I'm going to show you some examples and I'm going to exit my slide and I'm going to go to the website. Rena, can you see my website? I just want to make sure.
Yes, sir.
Okay, thank you very much. So you can see this is the website and you have the link at the end of the presentation. So I'm just going to go to an example just to show you what are the elements. I'm going to go to technology because I think that that's very, very relevant to our current teaching practice. And let's go to, for example, mobile assisted ESL, EFL vocabulary learning. So if I say I'm quite interested in, let me just blow it up a little bit. I'm very interested in how to use mobile technologies to develop ESL, EFL learners vocabulary. What are some methods or does it work? So this is a publication in 2019. It's a systematic review and meta-analysis. In our infographic summary, we first define some key terms in the article. As I mentioned, some of the jargon may not be very, very teacher-friendly. So for example, in this article, there is the term word retention. So they focuses, when they talk about effects of vocabulary learning, they actually focus on word retention, which refers to what, how long learners remember newly acquired words. So we define the terms in very simple wordings. And then we tell the teachers, what can I learn from this secondary research? This is basically the research question. So do mobile technologies help ESL, EFL learners learn and remember new words? This is a very relevant question to teachers. So I'm going to try mobile technologies. Does it work? Yeah, so they may want to know that. So what we are presenting here is the evidence being summarized. So this is very, very appealing to most teachers. So when you're reading this summary, you're actually reading the evidence from 33 primary studies published between 2005 and 2018. So that's the value of secondary research. You read one, you have 33 in this case. What does it find? So we try to summarize the major findings in a few bullet points. And finally, what we did is we added a section called how can I use the findings in my teaching? So we kind of provide some suggestions. Of course, they are not materials, right? But they are suggestions, ideas for you to incorporate mobile technologies and applications in your own language classroom. This is one page and you can finish it in less than 5 minutes. So this is what you will find in every infographical summaries on our website. All right, Let me just go back to the presentation. So, but still, it's in its early days. So you can see that it's mostly us researchers presenting findings in an accessible way to teachers. It's still rather one way, isn't it? So our next stage is actually to, first of all, expand the database, keep on adding new secondary research, but at the same time to co-create teaching resources with English teachers around the world. So we're going to recruit teachers soon to kind of create materials or lesson plans or what have you based on the synthesized findings. In this way, I'm involving the teachers in the knowledge creation process, and we'll also make those lesson materials freely available to the public on our website. But that's our future plans. And I'm conscious of time, so I'm going to summarize here by emphasizing what I actually want to say. So far, I have talked about relationships between researchers and practitioners in language education from the perspective of love, echoing the conference theme. I've talked about how we should view researcher-practitioner relationship from a praxis perspective, and also what actually have been done in the field to facilitate dialogues between researchers and practitioners. But looking ahead, what we really want as a field, as a profession, ELT profession, is the establishment of an evidence ecosystem. So what precisely is evidence ecosystem? Ecosystem, as we all understand in the natural world, refers to the relationship between the living organisms and the environments around them. And so we're looking at the environments per se as a profession. So there are different elements in an evidence ecosystem. There are people in this system who are regarded as evidence producers and evidence synthesizers. For example, universities, they are responsible for producing research, synthesizing research findings. And there are also evidence distributors and transformers. For example, they are some professional bodies, for example, the British Council, of translating those or collecting those evidences and disseminating those evidences to frontline teachers. And of course, the often overlooked party in the ecosystem is the evidence implementers. So they are the teachers. So we have to get all these different parties working together. And most importantly, it's not just the presentation of these four parties, because we all know they are there, right? But it's the cyclical nature of this diagram you can see there. The evidence producers inform evidence synthesizers, synthesizers inform transformers, transformers informs implementers. That makes sense. But then don't miss out the last link. The implementers, their feedback, their experiences also go back to the evidence producers. That's the missing link, I think, in the ecosystem. And that's what we have to work harder as a field. And Sharples, who created this wonderful diagram on evidence ecosystem, actually thought that it is the frontline professionals, the teachers in this case, who should be at the heart of evidence-informed practice. In educational research, I think it's absolutely true, because no matter what we do, no matter what we publish, no matter what we say as researchers, if they don't get translated into classroom practices, if there is no uptake of research by frontline teachers, what's the purpose of conducting educational research? Think about that. I mean, I'm not sure about other fields, but in education, if research does not impact practice, can you give me another reason for doing such research? Yeah, so that's very important. And so we have to center on the needs of practitioners. So what practitioners needs are actually three things, and I think we cover them basically. First is some trustworthy evidence. There is evidence that I can trust. I know when I see this, it's published there, I can trust. So they have to have certain knowledge about, for example, what journals they can trust. And the second thing is accessible overviews. So this is something they really wanted. This is something my project is addressing, and of course other initiatives like Oasis is trying to address. Can you give us something very accessible, something that we can understand, and something very, very practical? So don't tell me I should use mobile technologies when the learners are ready. Okay, so that's very big. Give me practical information, like in what situation, what are some of the apps, or what are some of the activities I can do with learners with mobile technologies. They want something very, very practical so that they can apply the evidence with confidence. So I think this is something that is broader than every single one of us. It's not about a single researcher. It's not about a single professional. And it precisely echoes what I mentioned at the beginning about the definition of love from Bible, that it's not self-seeking and it's about developing trust. So it takes the whole field to take this open scholarship initiative to the next level. So I just want to acknowledge, of course, the support of the project by the two universities I just mentioned, Queen's University Belfast and University of St. Andrews, and also the references. If you're looking for them, they're at the bottom or on top of the slides when I cite them, but not at the end, so you won't find the reference list here. If you want to follow up on open scholarship, on anything about the topics that I shared, please feel free to keep in touch, to ask questions here. And of course, if you want to know more about the project, you can scan the QR code here. We'll be in touch. I'm also on Twitter. I have 3 accounts, and you can always contact me on Twitter. And that's the website of Graphics. That's the link to the website that I shared with you just now. So thank you very much. I will hand over to Babu or Rita. I think you're on mute, Babu.
Oh, sorry. So, Dr. Singh, thank you. So please wait. Can you see that question? Will you be able to read yourself, or you want me to read it for you?
You mean the questions?
Yeah, in the chat box.
I mean, I can see some. Not all questions are related to the talk, though. So there is one.
School system.
I can read that. So
yeah.
Let me just read that. Okay. What do you think should be initiated as part of learning with higher secondary school students so that they could become a better researchers? Wow. Okay. So are you saying, if I understand this correctly, is to preparing secondary school students as researchers, as language education researchers? Am I correct? Is that right?
Yeah.
Okay, so I think that's an excellent initiative. I think I have never. Okay, yes. So I think it's very, very important to develop a researcher mindset for students, and it's not about whether they will one day be a researcher or a language education researcher. It's about the mindset. And I still remember in the induction to my own students at Queen's, I talked about a researcher mindset. Being a teacher, you need a researcher mindset. Being a doctor, you need a researcher mindset. Going shopping, you need a researcher's mindset. And cooking, you need a researcher mindset, because you have to search for things. You have to search for relevant information. You have to judge whether the information is suitable, is trustworthy, it's credible. These are all part of the qualities of what we call a researcher. So I think it's basically, I think it's definitely an important initiative. And about your question about what do you think should be initiated as part of the learning, it's precisely what I mentioned. It's the mindset that we have to cultivate among secondary school students. It's not really about, what research methods or what's literature review. I don't think that's relevant to them at that stage, but having an open mind about knowledge, about the nature of knowledge, about how knowledge is constructed or co-constructed, about where I can locate reliable and trustworthy information. I think that's essential components of that research training.
Okay, so thank you. And I think Dr. Singh has made a very interesting link between language education and love. So Sin is very
There is
passionately
another
talking
question
about.
to take.
Chong, can I ask a
Sorry.
question?
Sorry.
Oh, sure. Yeah.
Yeah.
Go ahead. Go
Sure.
ahead.
Good evening, Mr. Chong. Good evening, Mr. Chong. Now, I was really thinking quite a lot about what you were talking regarding the gap between the researchers and the practitioners. Because we perform from two different geographic locations where academic standards and objectives are quite different. I wonder whether have you really seen these dialogues in practice between the practitioners and the researchers? If you have seen, where is it more in vogue? Is it at school levels or is it at higher education and college levels? That is one of my questions. My second question is where you see this gap being minimized with dialogues, if it is being successfully implemented, are there any policies in place whereby the practitioners and the researchers come together and create a more impactful environment out of this practice? So if you could guide us on that, maybe we can put in a few trials in our own working environments.
Yeah, thank you very much for your questions. I think definitely there are initiatives internationally. Of course, I don't have information about different parts of the world, but I do know, for example, British Council is working really hard with partners around the world to produce, for example, some landscape research to kind of look at the educational situation in a particular country or continent and to provide advice accordingly. They have been sending out, I think, tenders to researchers to conduct those studies. There are, of course, the more traditional types of so-called dialogue, like professional development workshops, talks or training. I mean, those are good initiatives, and those are necessary. But what I'm thinking is, again, that the word dialogue means two-way. So I think there must be a starting point, right? The starting point can well be the researchers presenting research on a particular topic. Maybe the teachers are very interested in computer-assisted language learning, and the researchers present some findings, but then there needs to be follow-up. So there needs to be more sustainable initiatives, not just I come here, give you a talk, whatever you take away, send us the PowerPoint, and that's it. That's usually how it's done today. So I think there needs to be more long-term partnership between researchers and teachers. And responding to your other question, I think it's more common from my own perspective, which is very limited, is that the partnership is easier in higher education, in teachers teaching in, for example, universities, colleges, than in schools, simply because schools have a lot more restrictions that they may not be restrictions per se, but they are restrictions in this context because, for example, think about the assessment system. Think about the examination, that teachers have to prepare learners for a particular examination, for example. And if you talk to them about, okay, let's use mobile technology, it's pretty cool, it works. They may think, well, but I'm expected to prepare my learners for the test, for the examination. That's my job. That's affecting my teacher evaluation, that's affecting my promotion or what have you. So they are less likely to engage in such dialogue. So there are a lot of constraints in that context. That's why I think it's precisely important to involve the teachers in that partnership. Is to listen to the teachers, the needs of that particular school, that particular group of teachers, that particular country, and to devise a long-term professional development plan. And I think that's something that can be done quite inexpensively, especially now with COVID, that everything has moved online. So for example, the second phase of my project of Graphics I just shared, it's to co-create materials with teachers. So what I will do is ask them to pick maybe one or two infographics that they are interested in or relevant to the context, read them, and I will meet with them several times to kind of develop materials that they think would suit their own needs, but are research informed. That's one example of how we can do that. I hope I answered your question. I'm kind of flying around, but yeah.
Okay. Do we have more questions? Any more questions? Okay. So as I was saying, Dr. Sin is very passionately talking about, and of course, it's very authoritative and scholarly about the need to link researchers and practitioners in language education. And he's talked about open sciences, open scholarship, and these days we talk about knowledge commons and cultural commons. So I think it's very important here. And he also has talked about few initiatives, including his own, like T-Soul graphics. And this, of course, I think is talked about secondary research. So thank you very much, Dr. Sin, for your scholarly and informative talk. And we really appreciate your great research work in language education. And I think this will be very useful for the researchers and teachers here. Thank you. So we have Mary Soni will propose the vote of thanks. Thank you.
Thank you, sir. Gratitude is the fairest blossom that springs from the soul, and I'm indeed very happy to be able to propose the word of thanks today. I extend my sincere gratitude to our honorable key speaker, Dr. Sin-Wang Chong, for his enlightening lecture. The part where you discuss about the researcher-practitioner relations and highlighted the aspect of mistrust between the two parties was particularly thought-provoking, as most of us in the audience are research scholars and teachers, as were your opinions on the need of praxis of theory and practice and open scholarship. I'm sure that after listening to you, we would try to enmesh practice with theory as we study and create bodies of knowledge. Your entire lecture was supplemented with a myriad of examples and useful resources accessible for all, and it made your talk all the more interesting to listen. Thank you so much, sir. I'm also grateful to Dr. Bapurajan, Chair for the session, for your valued presence and support. I would also like to thank the Kerala State Higher Education Council and Department of Sociology and Teresian International of St. Teresa's College, Ernakulam, for taking the initiative to organize this session. A note of appreciation to the listeners for attending the session and for being a wonderful audience. Once again, extending our gratitude to all. Thank you.